Hello, and welcome to the Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. Join us as we explore imposter syndrome in the creative world, chatting with authors and artists about how self-doubt affects their work and lives. We'll discuss creativity, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and encountering imposters in real life. Let's dive into the forces that fuel and challenge the most talented minds.
Today, we are thrilled to have producer, podcaster, and writer Kate Hergott on the show with us today. Kate is the creator of the Bookwild Collective, a platform featuring a wide range of bookish content. She started with her podcast, Between the Lines, where she interviews authors about their books and writing processes, and later added Killing the Tea, a buddy podcast where she and Gare Billings discussed favorite thrillers and authors. Eventually, she merged Between the Blinds and Killing the Tea into one podcast, Bookwild, where she interviews authors on Tuesdays and talks with a different bookstagrammer or booktuber on Fridays about various book-related topics in the buddy podcast style. Kate, thank you so much for being on. We're so thrilled. We also want to mention that we are teaming up with Kate for this podcast. So this is a special one. Thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm excited. The tables have turned. It was the first time I was sitting here letting someone else do the intro.
Yeah, well, you have so many amazing interviews with so many authors, so you are kind of the master at this. So hopefully we can live up to all of your talent and expectations.
Well, I have been loving listening to you guys' episodes, so you are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if it feels right at some point, I mean, if you feel like just hijacking the episode, run with that thought, and we'll see how we do. You know what I mean? This could be fun. This could be a table turn for everyone.
Yeah. That is the fun thing when you Olivia Day Wallace, I feel like a lot of people know her in the thriller world. But it's like, as you guys probably know too, maybe, I think you guys have kind of known the people you've been talking to, but sometimes the thing that's like so intimidating is like, maybe I've only like DM'd an author and you're about to just like kind of pseudo meet face to face. You have no clue what the vibe is going to be like. And you're like, okay, like, can I handle this? And I typically can, but I still get nervous about it. But then like when Olivia came on, and she's on the Thrillers by the Book Club podcast, which I always think I'm going to say it wrong. So that's why I end up saying it like that. But she does podcasting. So it was like, then like when I was like podcasting with her, she reversed and had questions for me too. And I was like, oh yeah, this is what it's like when I'm not like the only person coming up with questions. So it is kind of nice when it's like goes both ways.
But I mean, you guys found,
and I think
I was just going to say, you guys found such a great rhythm on that episode of being able to go back and forth and kind of, kind of trading questions and having it be a good flow. So yeah, that was fun.
Yes, I agree. It was fun.
Well, and I was going to say, I feel like the best podcasts are the ones that are really free flowing and you kind of just feel like you're sitting around a table having conversations with friends. And I think that in all of the interviews I've heard you do, there is that quality. And I think that probably comes from the fact that you read all of the books. That's very evident, and authors really appreciate that. Like we know when we've interviewed with you, you've read our books, you have really thoughtful questions, you have insights that we might not have thought of necessarily, or things that we don't get to talk about because they aren't kind of like the run-of-the-mill questions. Yeah. So I'm really curious, Kate, to know more about like, how did you end up doing books and book podcasting?
Yeah. So I'm going to go way back with this one. But to really give it all of the plot points I feel like it needs, my husband and I, this was 7 or 8 years ago, probably about 8 years ago. Video wasn't huge on social media yet, but we knew that like both of us were interested in creating content, even though it was mostly just like photos at the time. But video had kind of just come to Facebook at that point. And I got fired from my job, and we were like, what if we tried like running our own business and like helping people with stuff? And so I designed a lot more websites back then. He had like picked up camera skills. We just kind of had like a mixture of different skills going on. And we were pretty close to the real estate industry. So we ended up doing a lot of listing photos as like a way to use cameras, but also like have fun with them too. But it was like, this would kind of help pay the bills while we were doing that. And what that can mean is like that you go to like 5 listings in a day to take pictures. And so you'll just be in the car forever. And so I was like, how am I going to fill my time? Because like I like music, but like it's not necessarily always keeps my attention if I'm in the car for like 3 hours a day. And so back then was when I kind of like stumbled upon how many podcasts there were. And so like I like fell in love with podcasts just because like I was driving all over the place doing listing photos back then. And I just thought it was really cool how much you get to know someone when it is that like longer form, not just like 15-second bites of someone. It was kind of crazy to me too, because it's like, I feel like I saw a post about this, all the different versions of podcasts that there are now, but there are kind of some that are like replacing late night or are kind of the night idea, but it's in that long form. And so I was listening to a lot of just like celebrity interviews, like we're really into comedy, so a lot of comedians. And there would be people that like like Dax Shepard would be one example, and now he has one, but like that you like didn't really know anything about, and then you heard them long form with someone, and you're like, wow, I like understand this person more. They feel like a real person to me, and that was just like really interesting to me. And then some of them that even like dive into like mental health or just like have more vulnerable moments, I was realizing they would stick in my mind too. And so then there's just like, you're like gaining from everyone's experience in like all kinds of different ways. So I really fell in love with listening to podcasts back then. And then they became more and more popular, especially with the people we were working with too, where they're kind of a great way to get content because you're forced to make content every week. And then there's the short form, there's your long form for YouTube. So people were basically getting more interested in doing their own. And so then we bought all of the equipment to film people's podcasts in person with the clients that we knew here. And so we started producing those. So that was how I kind of like learned everything you have to do to set one up. And then forever, I've been a big reader. So that was like always there. And I was just still reading, I guess is the point there. And I gravitated towards, like, I always thought it was cool when like writers were on podcasts, because their writing process was so interesting to me, like hearing about that kind of stuff. And so at one point I was like, I have all the equipment for it. There are like episodes of stuff that I really like, and I really like hearing how people like create stuff. And I was like, maybe I should see if I could have one. So at the time, I also I had no concept of how possible it was going to be to get people to say yes, basically. So I reached out to like, I think 6 of the most recent books I've read. And 5 people said yes, like really quickly. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm starting a podcast, because they're like, yeah, sure, when? And I was like, oh, okay, like this is possible. And so that was how Between the Lines started. And then kind of, I can't remember how many episodes had come out, but at the beginning of Between the Lines, Ashley Winstead mentioned Gare to me in like episode number 2, and then Jamie Lynn Hendricks mentioned him in like episode 4, and it was like, and Ashley connected me to Jamie Lynn Hendricks, so it was like there were all these like connections just happening so quickly. And so then he and I got connected and just started talking a little bit, and then we were talking more, and he had always been interested in like maybe doing a podcast, and I was like, okay, what if I could have like talking about kind of more free flow. It's a way more conversational podcast than Between the Lines is, like interview wise. And I was like, okay, this could be really fun. And then it was really fun. And he was like the first example too of like, I've talked about this on a couple of podcasts now, but like my immediate people that I meet in my like physical life, not many people read. And like even less are in the really specific thriller genre that I just like can't bring myself to read anything outside of. And so it was the first time that like I met someone online and had so much in common with them, and like the first time that anyone had read most of the books that I've read. And so it was like, wow, we could talk forever. And so then we did. We talked for weeks and weeks and weeks. I think like a year and a half. It was like, I think it was a year and a half. We might have gotten close to 2 years. And then he's just had some health stuff come up. So it's just a big commitment when you're dealing with health stuff. So when he was mentioning that to me, I was like, okay, I've really enjoyed both of these things, like having a conversational, topical episodes and interviews with authors. And I was like, what if I merged them together? So then they got merged together into Bookwild, which people need to hear the story to really understand the name. But my maiden name was Buckner, and my husband Tyler calls me Buckwild, or used to call me Buckwild, because for all kinds of reasons, I'm a little bit savage and just like have moments where like that was the only word he could come up with to describe me. So way back when I started Between the Lines, I really loved the idea of a collective of podcasts, like all kinds of bookish content. For anyone who's familiar with Barstool Sports, it's kind of like the easiest way to think of it. They produced, I don't even know now, maybe a dozen podcasts under their umbrella. And I was like, it would be really cool to have other podcasts on here down the road. So like I made everything under the Bookwild Collective, hoping that there would be more podcasts. Then when I merged mine, we turned it into just for Bookwild. And now you guys are my first addition to the platform. You guys obviously are thriller writers, but what I think is so cool is that like 4 years ago when I was thinking about this, I was like, it's just, I don't love too many not thrillers. Like even when I try, it just doesn't work for me. And I'm always like, it would be cool to have content that's just not just about thrillers. And you guys have talked to some very interesting people that I wouldn't have talked to necessarily. And I've loved it. So it's cool seeing that all come full circle.
Happy to hear that. Firstly, let's keep the love train going for Gare quickly, because Gare actually, I suppose, is the person who really connected us ultimately. For the listeners out there who don't have this context, which there's no reason you necessarily would. When our first book, The Woman Inside, came out, Gare was a very early champion of that book, really got behind it, like reached out, was very passionate, super supportive, gave us a lot of love. We ended up actually on our first book tour, we were in Vermont, near where Gare is upstate, and we reached out and we ended up meeting up with him and his mom. We like had dinner with them before the event. He drove hours to come to this event that we were doing in Vermont. I mean, so we love Gare to the ends of the earth, and he's amazing. And it's wonderful that it sounds like from the way you're describing it, it's like that's really how this thing has come together. A lot of it is community and people introducing, you to them and him to them and them to you and her to, however, and, and here we are as a result. So it's like, it's kind of wonderful. And it sounds like from the way you're describing it too, it sounds like a lot of that for you to have kind of taken from where you started to get here, a lot of it was you adapting, going with the flow, kind of meeting people and taking things as they come, sort of riding the wave as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I've noticed it more in the last year, I think, because a couple of things, but I'll finish that sentence. What I've noticed a lot more this year is the community aspect, and like how much of it happened where it wasn't that I didn't want to build it, but it wasn't what I was even thinking about when I started it. And so then like the fact that I have these like friendships with so many people, like not even just authors, like other readers too. It's been super cool because now some of my like closer friends that I like talk to even in personal life stuff are like people I've met through Bookstagram. And then there's like being around all of it made me like thinking about writing myself again, because it's like it was always, I've been writing since I used to write a lot when I was a kid and then I'm an adult. But being around it got me thinking about it again. And then kind of in the last 6 months, like you guys included Sagi Schwartz. I'm looking backwards because she sent me some cool stuff after our interview. And Hallie Sutton have been like so supportive about writing. So it's like I wouldn't have had that either if I didn't start it at all.
Do you think, Kate, that you gravitated towards writers and authors because you had that desire in yourself?
I think so. So it was, yes. Yes is like the technical answer. I wrote all the time when I was a kid. Like I had just like pages of stuff. And I actually have some of it over in the corner over there, and it is cool. Like sometimes reading, I'm like, wow, I would like have that kind of a grasp on dialogue, and I'm like 12 years old. So I did it a lot back then, but my parents made it pretty clear that that's like not what, like it's not, it's a dream, which it is. Like no one's wrong in saying that it kind of is, but the creativity was not prioritized, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I went to school for business, like not like English, which you guys talked about, so we're into the meta part. But when you guys were talking about how you didn't go to schools necessarily for it, same thing, where like it was like, oh, I didn't learn how to write a book necessarily. So lots of stuff happened in my 20s, as is like common for a lot of people, I'm sure. But it has always been like after I watch a movie too that I really love, like especially nowadays, I'm so excited to go like see all the coverage they did on it, to like hear about how someone had that idea. So that had always been there. So I think I was kind of always interested in it, probably in the sense that like I didn't feel like I had an education on it. So like learning about it was interesting to me because I knew like, oh, when I was a kid, I could write stories. But then like as an adult, it was like, but like, how do you do that? And some of my personality is a little bit rigid and actually skews a little more logical than creative. At least like that's one of the stories I've been telling myself, is like I'm really going with it. So it was like, I knew I had the interest, but I was like, but how do you just like imagine something? Like, how do you imagine 300 pages of something? So I think when I started, and this kind of dovetails with the writing I just did with Hallie here at the beginning of June. I think when I started the podcast, it was like, maybe I'm just like interested in writers, like, which would be fine too. Like if I just wanted to talk, like there are plenty of people who were like just podcasting about it is the interest. So I think that was what I was kind of thinking at the time, was like, maybe I'm not a writer because how do I like actually write a whole book? But maybe I'm just like really into reading and want to talk to authors. And then it was, what was it? I think it was Ashley Winstead talked about Story Genius, and she talked about doing that character process and then how she would outline so heavily and then basically knew each scene to go in and write. And that was like the first time where I was like, oh, like the really logical part of my brain was like, oh, there's a structure to it, and made it seem a little more possible. So then it just kept seeming more possible. And then my therapist was like, so when are you going to write yours? And I was like, fair question. So then I started writing.
And the thing you mentioned earlier with Hallie, that's the 1,000-word challenge, right? That you were doing?
Yes. Yeah. So she was just like, literally we recorded it, whatever the last day of May is, May 31st or 30th. We were recording that day, and she was saying, shout out to Hallie too. She was the first one to ever reverse it with me on like while we were recording. Was like, "How's your writing going?" And I was like, but I loved her for it. And Tyler, after I got done recording, he was like, "I heard her flipping on you," and I was like, "Yeah, she did." So she brought up on like May 31st that she was going to do this 1,000 words a summer, which was 1,000 words a day for 14 days. And I just, for all kinds of reasons, had gotten out of the habit of writing. And I was also, I think, this was what I was kind of referencing earlier. I think my critic was starting to do the like, maybe you're just a really good podcast producer for this stuff, and that's fine. Like maybe you're not a writer. Like it is okay. You're still doing a lot. And I think that had been settling in on top of there were some personal things that happened that just made me get out of the habit. And she was like, "I'm doing this." And Sagi, who I mentioned earlier, had been DMing me because we had talked about how I was trying to write a book. And so she'll DM me every now and then and be like, "How's it going? You're not writing the void. I want to know about it." and I was like, okay, the timing of this all, like, I want to get the habit back. So maybe I need to do this with her. So we did go ahead and do it. And kind of what I was saying, a lot of my critical thoughts got kind of stomped on because it was just like, you just have to do this for 14 days. You know why you want to do it for 14 days. Like, just sit there and write. Like, you're just going to do it. And so it was like, I felt like I got to know myself in a different way in the last 2 weeks.
It's incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you talking about the kind of battle between your logical brain and your creative brain is something that I think is really common, and I identify with that a lot. And I think the way that I've found I can kind of leverage that battle is to kind of approach the practice of writing as logic, right? Like, I need to do X number of words today, and get out of my own way in the sense of not thinking about like, am I a writer? Aren't I a writer? Like, what am I good at? What am I bad at? What do I want this to look like? All of the overthinking that kind of lives in the creative brain, and then just be like, I have a goal, I need to meet it. Because I think some of the best advice that I've gotten is, you know, the only way to really be a writer is to just write, just sit down and write. You know, it's training. You get better the more you do it. And I just started again doing the Artist's Way. And I don't know if you guys know about that, Julia Cameron's program, book and program, but, you know, that part of an aspect of that is morning pages. So like the first thing you do when you wake up is write. And that has not been my practice for the last few years. You know, I have about 100 other things that happen before I sit down and write. So I just wanted to mention that because I think that's been really helpful. Like, if I get into a good groove and then fall off, that's a good way to kind of keep it going. It's like a personal trainer.
Yeah. That's sort of a follow-up question actually for both of you, because I feel like there's a little bit of a similar thread to what you both or what you each just talked about. I feel like a lot of what, as writers, right, as creatives, a lot of what we end up doing without necessarily meaning to is we let the fear kind of talk us out of the practice in a way, right? And so I'm wondering, with Kate, with you, with doing the 1,000-word challenge, and then Liz, with you getting up and sort of writing fresh with a clear head before you've had a chance to kind of talk yourself out of it, has that helped? Have those things helped demonstrably with the kind of keeping you in the rhythm, with like letting you maybe feel a little more kind of ownership about stuff?
Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go?
You go.
Okay. Yes. So a couple things happened for me with doing it. So I was starting to think the same thing where I was like, I just need to do it early in the morning, because like I was having this thing where I was waking up at 5:45 just on my own, and I was like, okay, like I could probably just start doing it immediately. And then at owning your own business, it's so easy to like lose track of your day to like all the stuff that comes up, and then you're like, I don't really want to write right now. So I was like, maybe like I just force myself to do it during that time, and like then I will that'll be the habit I build too. that worked for a couple days. And then just some nature of my work, sometimes it's the best for me to get straight out of bed, literally sit and work while my brain is fresh. So that was starting to happen. But because I was like committed to the, like, I'm going to be texting Hallie, like whether I did it or not, for 14 days, it was one of those things where like a couple nights I started writing at 8 and I finished at like 9:30. And as someone who like has been asleep between 9:30 and 10 lately, it was like in my head something that I would have said, like, that's not the time for me to write. And actually I got to have the experience of like, it was completely untrue, because when it was just a non-negotiable, I did it. And like some of the like coolest scenes came out actually writing at night. So it actually kind of challenged head trash even around the time of day that I do it, just because it made me realize like if I'm choosing to prioritize it, I get it done no matter when it is. So that kind of happened. And what else? Your question was about ownership, I think. And then some of it too was just that I need to commit to it, and that like I do want the results of writing each day. Like I do eventually want to finish my first story. So it kind of got me back, like feeling that again.
Nice.
I love all of that. I just want to like put a little bookmark into the importance of accountability. Yes. Because you talked about like having to text Hallie, and obviously this is kind of the engine of Greg and my partnership.
I bet.
But I think that accountability is a really good reminder to like writers old and new, if you're having trouble, you know, like tell someone in your life, I need to write this amount and I need you to check in on me, you know, like a writer welfare check. Like, how you doing? How much Netflix have you watched today?
Like you seem up to date on TikTok for someone who doesn't have time.
Right. Well, and it's funny that you mentioned TikTok, because that segues into my answer to Greg's question, which then I'll put back on you in one reframe. That what I was finding is I was waking up and looking at email and social media and then the Times or whatever, you know, news outlet I was reading that day before getting out of bed. And that was like problematic for a number of reasons. And like email obviously just got me right into the headspace of work. And, you know, when I'm not writing for myself, I'm ghostwriting for others or editing. So I'm like immediately thinking about other people's work. And then, you know, social media, I really have a hard time separating myself from it. So I get very impacted by what I'm seeing, and not in like a good, inspirational, creative way. It's kind of like weighs me down.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm alone in that experience.
No.
And then looking at the news, which I think for a long time as a writer, I've rationalized as like, it's imperative, like to know what's going on in the world and to get ideas for stories. And that hasn't been my experience recently. You know, reading the news has really started to bog my brain down and kind of have the opposite effect of inspiration. So writing in the mornings when I've been successful, and like, mind you, my morning pages sometimes happen in like 5 minutes, you know, it's not a lot of time, but I think that what happens is like, I'm still a little bit tired. I'm still kind of in my subconscious brain, you know, set. I'm maybe coming off of dreams. So it's like the quality of the writing is different in that I'm not yet plugged into that inner critic.
Yeah.
And what's coming out of the material is really helpful, just like insight for myself. Like you talked about the head trash, and I think that's like the first glass of water during the day. You know, it kind of hydrates you and cleans you out. I think that for creative people, it's really important to check in with yourself in that regard first thing before you start to get influenced by, you know, other people in your life, by the emails, by the news. So I'm kind of excited because one of the projects I'm working on is like very story based and specifically ghost story based. And so it's kind of a cool experience to be working in this like realm of my head that's a little bit detached, a little bit, you know, surreal.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely accessing some cool stuff. So I really recommend it. And, another like kind of shortcut to it is if you're like, I can't wake up and just like get in front of the computer or pick up a pen, is to talk it, like record yourself, have it transcripted into words, and then look at it later. And I'll use that sometimes as like a jumping off point.
That's cool.
But Greg, I'm curious, I think one way Greg and I differ is you're very regimented. Like you have your word count. You're very good at like sitting down. I think you have a schedule to an extent. How has that helped your productivity, especially on working on your solo novel?
Well, it's interesting. It's a lot of, with the solo novel, it's a number of things that both of you just talked about have sort of dovetailed in this. One, it's very based on current news stuff. So while I find current news similar to what you said, Liz, sort of enraging, depressing, all of the things you can attach to that, all of the emotions, I'm trying to use the writing in a cathartic way to try and process a lot of that stuff. So in a way, I'm having to I'm intentionally confronting that, I should say, but in a way where I'm trying to process it as I write it in a sense. Okay. So that's one part of it.
Mm-hmm.
The other part, to your question, Liz, about sort of the consistency of it, I found that consistency is good, again, for quieting that inner voice and all the fear. It's like if I can get to the desk early, what I try and do actually is I'll get up, have a cup of tea, have breakfast, and I'll do word puzzles. I'll do Wordle and connections and spelling bee and crossword to try and get the brain kind of humming, right? To try and just get in the phase. And also what I think that does too is also you put your brain on a specific task. So then there's less time for the invasive voice to come in and talk you out of what you're trying to do for the day, right? So if it's going well, what I'll do is I'll get in there, I'll do that, I'll get the brain kind of revved up, and then I'll sit down and I'll try and get my 1,000 words in for the day, right? In the last couple of weeks, and this is, Kate, kind of going back to your point, in the last couple of weeks, Liz and I have been working on a lot of the revision, copy edit stage of Trust Issues, which is our next book out together in January. So because of that, sometimes, you have days that are more admin days and more editorial and revision days. And so there have just been times where, you get to the point where that stuff comes first and you prioritize it. And then maybe I don't have time until 7 or 8 o'clock, at night to actually jump in with the new words. And I think that I had gotten into a good groove from a productivity standpoint, but also I had started to I had also started to fall into that trap of thinking, oh, well, now you're a morning writer and you can only write in the morning. And again, it's so much of this thing is it's like, it's undoing those narratives that you've written you've written yourself into that corner, right? With the narrative that you've decided. Yeah. And so again, there have been a handful of nights where I haven't hit the desk till 9 PM and then I write till, 11 or midnight. And then again, there have been a couple of those things where there's some pages in there. I'm like, oh, this is good stuff, for a first draft at least. Yeah. So it's been a combination of trying to be as regimented as possible just to keep the momentum going, but then also not get too trapped in this idea of what you are and how you work as a writer either. Being able to shift on the fly a bit more. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the struggle sometimes, literally just in general with like actually kind of accountability. So some of it is like being highly accountable to yourself and really productive is like great. And sometimes that means like doing the same exact thing at the same exact time. And sometimes that is the only way it succeeds. But then it's like, if you do it to the fact that you can't bend, basically, like, then you've just like you've actually kind of become less productive by being just like obsessed with like, I do it this way. And so like, that is the only way I get it done, but I get it done. So it does, it kind of like ends up hurting you. And I struggle a lot internally with black and white thinking. So I just have to like constantly be catching that, where like I think the stories I love so much are not black and white. So like you would that would have translated into my brain, but my brain is so black and white, especially when I'm thinking about myself. And so sometimes Tyler is even like, oh, that was really black and white. And I'm like, oh, okay, you're right. I'm doing it again. So then it doesn't like help that you're like, oh, I make myself do it at the same time, because then sometimes it's flexible.
I'm curious about something as you're talking about this. Is it possible that part of the appeal of reading for you, and specifically the books you love, is that it gets you out of that kind of rigid headspace?
That's a really good, I wonder about that. Yeah. That's a really good thought, because it is like, I've become more aware of it. I think because I'm writing too, and reading about writing and like thinking about writing differently, where I am like, so I'm so interested in doing that. And like with my characters that I'm having the most fun with, it is like what you'll do to go into the, like how you'll justify some gray decisions or behaviors. But then I'm not like that all the time. So it probably is a break from like that thinking.
Is the work that you're doing right now, is that in the thriller genre?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you read exclusively in thriller and you're writing, which makes sense.
Well, so here's our second meta moment. I think it was with Scott Leeds. Greg, he asked you guys if you guys just read thrillers. And Greg, you were talking about how like you do read outside of it every now and then because of just like seeing what other genres do well too. Just to like be aware of it. And at the time, there was this book it's called The Force of Such Beauty by Barbara Borland that Hallie Sutton loves and has talked about so many times since she came on. But it's like not a thriller, but it has always been interesting to me. So when you brought that up, I was like, man, I really do need to like try that book. And so actually I'm reading it right now. But yes, I mostly am reading thrillers and writing thrillers, but this one is so emotional. I was like texting her and I was like, I'm crying reading this book. I was like, I'm used to my unemotionally available thrillers. This is so heavy. So yeah, I tend to say thriller.
I'm curious what it is about thrillers that you love. I mean, I love thrillers, obviously. So have you thought about what it is about that particular genre and that experience?
Yeah. So this is my fun anecdote for that one. There's a book called The Frozen River that just kind of recently came out. And it's historical fiction, but also like mystery. And my sister-in-law, who mostly reads just like contemporary, but she also likes kind of like wartime historical fiction as well. Basically, she doesn't read thrillers at all, but she picked that one up, and she was sending me Marco Polo. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's like a video chat platform. And she sent me Marco Polo. She's like, oh my gosh, there's so much tension in this book. And like, I just wish my kids didn't have any extracurriculars. And like, all I want to do is just read. Like, I have to know what's going to happen. I have so many questions. And when she was saying that, I was like, I think that is what I love about thrillers, is because I like love that feeling so much. Because she was even like, is this what you feel like all the time? And I was like, pretty much. Like, I am like, can I just get home and read? But like that feeling where like you have so many questions and like you're so intrigued and trying to figure something out, I feel like it like glues me to the page. So I think that's some of it. Also, I've been calling myself a pacing snob, which it's probably not snob, it's just like preference, but like I just prefer to have things happening. Like I struggle with a slow burn, or I just like to have things happening and changing, which happens a lot in thrillers.
You mentioned a little bit earlier when you were rediscovering some of your childhood writing, of like you were pleasantly surprised how well you had written dialogue. I'm wondering now, going back to the practice of writing, are there any particular things, aspects of it that you're having, the most fun with?
So what is the most fun right now? I have a main character, and through this process of actually doing the 1,000 Words of Summer, I finally realized that this other family story that I wanted to tell, it's just like third omniscient was what was going to work. Okay. So there's kind of like this third omniscient narrative of a reality family, and but my main character, who's like first person, is a journalist who like knows a really bad thing that someone in that family did. But the journalist is like really snarky and jaded. And so writing all of her snarky thoughts has been super fun for me, like so fun. Like I hadn't said that to anyone when I sent it to a couple of people, and people were like, the voice, like so snarky. So that part has been fun for me. And it's also kind of integrating, like, I really enjoy reality TV as well. A lot of Bravo. But also just celebrity culture intrigues me in general. So writing, like, the snarky side of it is very fun. Like, I'm really having a lot of fun with that. But the kind of funny part was that what I realized with this 1,000 Words of Summer thing, I was starting to come to the realization that what I needed in the book for me was like I'd written my main character up to the point that she was now going to go be with this family to write an article. And I was like stuck on what I wanted to happen there. And it was like, what I realized is like, for me, I needed to know the backstory. I needed to know the whole backstory of the family to start writing them together. So that was basically what I did. I got like 12,000 words of their lore, basically, that's relevant to the story. And it was significantly harder, even though I still had some like moments where I was like, wow, I'm really excited that I wrote that line. It was significantly harder stepping away from snarky and like needing to be emotional and like softer and have a more vulnerable perspective. So it was differently challenging, and I still enjoyed it, but writing the snarky stuff is very fun for me right now.
So where do you feel like the imposter syndrome is showing up the most for you in your life or in your writing or anywhere?
Well, anywhere. I'm like, how long do we have?
As long as you need.
With writing specifically, especially right before doing this 14 days, I like the biggest head trash is that I haven't finished. Like you do just call it a manuscript. See, there's some of my imposter syndrome. I don't always know what to call it. But I've never finished a story, like not even like a first draft. So that's like the biggest stuff that'll just creep into my head is it's so easy to think like, what if it's just not for you? And like the books you want to read, like instead of spending time writing, which obviously it helps to read, but I need to actually do the writing too. So like that was the biggest part that was coming into my head again was like, I think I was a little bit stuck when I mentioned earlier where like I'm learning I kind of need to know everyone. I need to know all the characters' backstories before I can have them interact. So I was kind of stuck at that and didn't like know what to imagine. And I was getting really hyper fixated on I need to have every scene outlined. And I was like, because that was the first thing that made sense to me when I like learned about writing. So I was like, that's the way I have to do it. And I just like assumed with my personality that was the way I would have to do it. And then when I just started writing because I just needed to write, I was like, you can come up with things while you're writing without a distinct plot. So I think like that helps get rid of some of the imposter syndrome because if I just had to sit there and write, like I would write, and then like the act of doing it makes me like believe I am one.
Yes. I think a huge part of writing for any writer too is when you are starting out is figuring out what works for you, because everyone has a different, partly because it's not regimented and there's not necessarily a follow, steps A through Z that work for everyone the same way. Part of it is just doing the work. And as you're doing the work early on, you're figuring out what works, right? Are you someone who has to outline everything? Are you better writing on the fly? How much of a character Bible do you need versus finding the character as you write forward? How much of a narrative arc do you need? How much are you finding that as you go? And so that's actually, it may not feel like the work early on, but that's actually part of the work. And that's part of the long-term work as a writer, which, I think you should absolutely consider yourself a writer, even though, that's for all of us. I think we run into those things, but it's that is part of your, process of figuring out what kind of writer you are or how you work best too. So, don't get, try not to get too disheartened if you run into those walls, because those walls are part of that's the renovation process, right? You got to, knock a few walls down to figure out what the layout of the house looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. It is just sitting with it and doing, like you're saying, where it's I wasn't writing myself out. It is all new to me, and I am just doing something new that I haven't done before.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes it's trippy for me too, because it's there's a part of me that just feels like I want to write a book.
Sure.
But then you're so do I? Or when I was having to pick it up at night when I was more tired, I'm yeah, but I do want to do this. And you're but you're doing it for this little desire of something that you felt, even though you don't know how it's going to play out.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, there's so much unknown. And if you're not a person who kind of thrives on unknowing, if you control and order, I'm speaking for myself, it's really scary to embark on a project and then keep it going if you start to lose that initial inspiration or impulse, because then it's just I don't know where this is going, what's going to happen with it, is this a waste of my time? It just kind of goes into the negativity. So I think it's a lot of heavy lifting if you have that tendency in your personality. If it's kind of well, I don't have that initial, oomph. That's why I have so many unfinished projects. Everything starts out as a really great idea and I'm super psyched about it for, a couple of weeks, and then it goes in the drawer, and I think that's part of the process too. But I just want to mention that, flipping it on you in a positive way, when we were thinking about whether we were going to do a podcast or not, that got largely inspired by the interview we had with you, that we enjoyed talking with you so much, and then learning kind of what you do. And then I think we followed up and said, we're kind of thinking about doing this, and who do we think we are? There's so many podcasts. Who needs, this or us? And you were very encouraging and, basically said, if you have an idea and you have that inspiration, then just do it. It doesn't matter how many other people are doing it or not doing it. So I would flip that very wise advice back on you and to our listeners that, if it starts to become a concept of maybe I'm not worthy, or I shouldn't do this, or other people are doing it better, it's kind of losing that thread of, I enjoy doing this. It makes me feel good. It serves a positive purpose in my life, and then what people think about it or what they take away from the finished product is kind of beside the point, depending on how much you can separate yourself from it.
That's really cool. I love that reversal, because I'm remembering how passionately I say that to people, where people will say to me there are a million podcasts, who cares if I make one? And I had been saying that. I said it to a couple of people at the same time that I said it to you that week, because people just happen to be talking about it or posting it in their stories. And I'm so quick to be but if you want to do it, do it. And you have no clue who you're going to connect with.
Right.
So that's a really good perspective shift, so that I can see it it there, but not with writing initially.
Yeah. Well, we're all our own worst critics and other people's best advisors sometimes. So, you know.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So as far as the kind of going back to the thriller genre and imposter syndrome and imposters and characters, I mean, I think the thriller genre is the kind of ultimate example of morally gray characters and duplicitous characters. And, you know, we obviously are all drawn to that. So what do you think it is about yourself and your reading experience that that's kind of what you gravitate towards?
Well, okay. I'm trying to... So some of it is I grew up around a lot of gaslighting. So I'll use that like as a broad generalization. So I'm aware that there's part of it that like I'm kind of wired to enjoy figuring out who's lying. So like I know there's that side of it is like, Tyler's brought that up before, where it's like, do you feel comfortable in the thriller world? Because of the duplicitousness of some of the stuff growing up. So I know that's there. But I think the other, like, there's just some extra level of, I mean, thrill is the word I'm ending up back on, which is kind of self-explanatory at that point. But when you're trying to, so Look Closer is an example I always bring up with like cons. Like it's so cool when you're able to like reveal something about a character where like they were directing you one way and like you were just going the wrong direction, even though like everything made it seem it was going that way, and then it was like, oh, actually this. So I think I've always found it really interesting how you can flip like the reader, you're like, I guess it's like a bait and switch too, like the way you can push someone in a certain direction with things and you can be wrong. It makes it even more fun to read, like specifically thinking about like cons and imposters and like people who are pretending to be something they aren't.
Right. For sure.
You're speaking our language.
Yeah. I mean, I would add a little bit to that. You were talking about kind of growing up in a certain situation where there was a lot of gaslighting and, you know, being familiar with like not the best communication and certain like aspects of, you know, manipulative behavior or self-serving behavior. There's also, it's occurring to me as you're saying that part of that is there's a lot of withholding that happens, right? There's emotional withholding and there's information withholding, which is actually the tool that good thriller writers employ to lead you down that wrong path.
Yes.
It's essentially, that's what we're all doing. We're withholding information intentionally for the reader, but ultimately for the benefit of the reader. So it's almost like you're taking a situation like that and you're reframing it in a positive light.
That is, I love that interpretation.
Yeah.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, and I always think about you have control when you're reading. You can kind of, you have control about how much of that experience you're having. You have control about making decisions or opinions about who did what and why, you know. And I don't know if there's probably not a psychological study that looks at what, you know, readers of which genres have what psychological profiles, but I'm going to make an educated guess just based on the three people here today and all of the other people we've talked to, is that if you've grown up in, you know, uncertainty, or as Greg, you mentioned, you know, kind of any manipulation, any secrets, lies, you know, I think there's a case to be made that even children of divorce may be more, you know, inclined to go towards genre like thrillers or mysteries or horror, just because it's a good way to kind of have control in your mind when things are out of control. And in stories you get to see, like, from a bird's eye point of view, everything that's happening, and eventually, you know, it ends however it's going to end.
Right. But it's like it's a version of compartmentalization that's ultimately therapeutic. I mean, it's ultimately, it's like reading as therapy in a certain way, with a lot of enjoyment and everything else kind of ladled on top.
Yes. The nice thing too,
I am fascinated.
Therapy
Go
too,
ahead.
is like if you tend towards being anxious or having too many thoughts, you can kind of watch me passively, and you can't read passively, and that's another thing that I think, because that's like there are studies that like show your like resting heart rate drops down, like all the benefits of reading. But it literally takes your whole mind. Like now, if you're really committed to overthinking, there will be times when you won't fix it. Like it doesn't work all the time, but I feel like 90% of the time it does. Where like if it's a book I'm enjoying, like you are sucked into it, and like you can't just have extra thoughts spinning.
Right. As you Kate, as you earlier mentioned before, I love this saying as well. It kind of sweeps the head trash out, right? You get rid of a lot of that head trash.
Yeah.
The reading process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
That can be great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the escapism that you talked about too, like going through your childhood and formative years being a reader, like a voracious reader. I think we all can qualify ourselves as that. The escape that happens, like when you were hearing from your sister-in-law, was that who it was? About the book she was in, you know, like that kind of escapism, that doesn't happen with every book, but when it does, it's so special. And I think people who are really, you know, avid readers, when that happens, they like, you chase that, you know, like I'm a book junkie. I always chase, you know, whatever that first escapist high was. And, you know, I'm curious what early books, like what really brought you into reading in a way that it became like the prominent source of escape for you?
So because I talked about it recently, I also remember like if I'm going all the way back to like, I don't know how old I was when Ella Enchanted came out. And I loved that book so much. There was a lot going on there. A girl forced into obedience without questioning anything. There was a lot that spoke to me in that book, and I loved it. I reread it over and over again, which is something I don't do now. And then, so oddly enough, I keep looking over here because that's where it is. But when I did an episode where I like did kind of go through some of my writing, and when I was a kid, and I wrote that I wanted to write twisted fairy tales, which is intriguing because I don't necessarily feel that way now, but at the same time, I'm like, who knows? Like maybe I've got it in me. So I loved that book. That's a book I remember just loving. And then similar to some of my sci-fi interests now, which I think it was Scott who on here said he goes more fiction, less science, and that would definitely be my sci-fi. I got really into this series called Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. But it was this like near future society where when you were 16 you underwent like massive plastic surgery essentially, and so like it's kind of talking about class divides by using uglies and pretties as like the classes of people at the time. So it was so cool, and I think it, like thinking of it now, very like Black Mirror-esque too, which I love so much. So those were ones that like stand out when I was younger. And then The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson was the first thriller. And I can't remember. I need to just finally look on my Goodreads and maybe I would know. Gone Girl and The Kind Worth Killing I read my freshman year of college when I was like now kind of getting to choose what books I read. And I was like, whatever this is, I need all of it. So those were the two that like made me like, oh my gosh, like you could get this obsessed and like sucked into a book. And then it's been thrillers ever since.
So those were your gateway drugs.
They were.
What are some of the ones that have been now, especially maybe coming back to embracing your writing identity? Are there particular titles that have kind of, fed into that or informed that or inspired that in ways?
Yes. So I love it. That's kind of broader, but what I do know is, like, as much as I still want lots of stuff happening, I really love character-driven thrillers. So, like, ones that do have the external plot and internal plot happening too. I know that's what I gravitate the most towards. And so then, kind of coincidentally, since she's on the podcast a lot, but Hallie Sutton has written 2 very Hollywood thrillers. And so there's a lot about fame that just is very intriguing to me, and the things people will do for it, and just like all the things, like, it just seems, it's like a really interesting, it's like what my brain gravitates toward a lot. And then it feels like it fits with thrillers a lot. So both of her books would be ones that have, but I've always, after I read Look Closer by David Ellis, I think I was reading Story Genius at the time. So it was like at the beginning of me just like learning about writing. And when I finished that one, I was like, the way I loved that book, I wanted to figure out how he wrote it. Like, I was like trying to think of like how I would make that many like interesting connections between characters. Because it's like, it's even long. It's like 450 pages. And like so many things change at the end where you're like, oh my gosh. And then there's even an emotional undertone that gets revealed in the end once you know everything. And so it was like me. I remember being like, I think I want to write a book like that. Like, I want to be able to have like handle like so many balls in the air is what I think about with that book. So I don't know what that one will necessarily be. It's definitely not what I'm writing now, but that one stands out. And Ashley Winstead, like the way she writes, just like not just female rage, but like sticking it to power generally, I guess. Like I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She's incredible. Those kind of social thrillers that she writes.
Yeah.
And her prose style is beautiful and everything else. She really is a very complete writer, I feel like.
I know.
She's great.
Yeah, I love her.
I just actually finished I think yesterday or the day before. Speaking of more of the Hollywood celebrity fame aspect, I just finished The Hollywood Assistant by May Cobb.
Me too.
Okay. So you've read that one. Good. Okay.
I finished it this week.
No spoilers. I haven't read it yet. It's on my pile.
You'll love it. But I love how she goes into the kind of the trappings of fame and celebrity in that one.
Yes.
That was really interesting.
And it is so atmospheric. Like her writing, like you feel like you're in LA. Like it's so good. Like you really feel like you're there.
Yes. Yeah, she conveys that beautifully.
I know. I'm so excited that you guys are having her on.
I know.
I do too. We're gonna have a make-up somewhere over here. I want to hear about I want to hear about her being on set too. I just have so many questions for her.
Oh yeah. She's living her best life right now. Isn't she? Incredible. Yes.
And your dog agrees.
Dog's chiming in.
Kate, for our last minute or two, I have a very important question for you. Did you match your nails to the Imposter Hour logo?
The logo. But and
I mean, beautiful. I know people who are listening can't see, but they're stunning.
Purple. I just started doing my own, and I was literally just doing them one night, and I was like, man, I just want something kind of different. And I was like, let's try it with what I have. And now I'm like, speaking of like patterns, I'll be stuck in this pattern for a couple months now. But it does. It fits everything.
Yeah. We'll consider this
Yeah.
Beautiful.
it was meant to be that we collaborated on this project.
I showed someone your guys' logo because I was like, isn't this so cool? And her comment was, she was like, that totally looks like it belongs with your stuff. And I was like, so that was a good feeling.
Well, quick shout out to Steve Luoma, who did all of our graphic stuff. He's a genius. If anyone needs, work done, Steve Luoma. Yes.
That looks very cool.
Yeah. He's a whiz. He does beautiful stuff.
I mean, you can see I already have it framed behind me. Yeah. This was, I'm obsessed with it.
Well, Kate.
Oh my God, Kate, speaking of obsessed, we are obsessed with you. Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
It's been a blast. And please, and obviously we'll be in touch with the podcast stuff, but please also consider us like accountability partners for writing stuff as well. Cause it really is, I think a lot of people, part of the reason that we're doing this podcast in the first place is the power of the writing and author and book community is incredible. For inspiration, for accountability, for, just the kindness and givingness of other people. It's, it really can help you move along through some of those rough patches and some of those I think incidents of self-doubt in really pretty special ways. So please, keep us in the mix with all that stuff, and we'll be very excited to read what you're coming up with.
I'm excited to have something for you to read.
Yeah. No pressure.
No pressure. As long as it takes.
Have fun with it, but we're excited.
Thank you.
Oh, Kate, thank you so much for everything you do for Imposter Hour. Where can people find you on socials and your podcasts?
So I'm Bookwild on Instagram. I'm not really big. I'm on TikTok as well, and I'm Bookwild. But Instagram's definitely like the bigger engagement area for me. And then you can also go to bookwildcollective.com to see everything about podcasts and all the links to social as well. So that's your other best bet.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, everyone should listen to your podcast. Yes. It's wonderful. You have great authors on, and my book pile has just tripled since I've started listening regularly.
Yeah.
Morning. All right. Well, Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced and edited by our esteemed and amazing guest today, Kate Hergott. And our original theme music was composed by Scott Leeds. And our logo, as we mentioned, was designed by the talented Steve Luoma.
You can find us on IG at Imposter Hour Podcast and online at imposterhour.com and on all major listening platforms. Kate Hergott, thank you for being here. Liz, thank you for diving into the deep end of the pool with this podcast. This has been a blast, and we're having fun growing it. And thank you for listening, everyone out there, the millions of people who probably have signed up by now, probably for this specific episode. Thank you. We'd be nothing without you.
Yes.